So, welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And I think I've given up on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. It seems to be just never hitting the time slot now. So, I guess we're moving to a bit more of a kind of free flowing format. So, this week I'm going to do the third in our series of Ask Me Anythings. And this is based upon a series of questions that you guys have been submitting via our Facebook page, I think, and also via our Facebook group. Feel free to continue to ask questions. I'm sure someone will post the thread underneath this video. We've done a couple so far. I seem to be doing roughly 3 questions per video. And I'm pretty much doing them, I think I've done everyone so far in the sequence that they are. There's a few where we've got the same question asked kind of twice, but in slightly different ways. So I'm also going to amalgamate some of them. Someone was asking about Dr. John Sarno, who wrote the book Healing Back Pain, and his attitude on ME chronic fatigue being psychosomatic. I did a question, I think, in the first Ask Me Anything, where I think I answered that there. Someone's asking about people having return of symptoms. There's another question similar to that I might get to today. Depends how many I get through. So I'm going to try and cover everything, but as I say, some things will get amalgamated into questions. So Naomi asked, are any advice about how to work on recovery and return to the real world at the same time? The stress associated with dealing with HR policies, procedures, errors, and managers that make decisions without consulting you is not conducive to recovery. And how do people manage continuing with recovery and OHC when statutory sick pay runs out? I'm going to try not to get on the soapbox here because I'm not sure how helpful that actually is. In terms of how people manage to continue with Optimum Health Clinic financially, that's a big question that I think I've touched on in a few places over the years. But Optimum Health Clinic is now, has been for the last 6 years, a registered charity. We don't run the organization in terms of profit, but any profit we do make goes into the research program that we're doing. And our long-term vision is building enough evidence base that we can get NHS funding people to have treatment. So that's just kind of a more kind of side comments on that. In terms of how people continue to access treatment, I'll come back to the other bits in a minute. Access OHC's services. That's why we do things like, we do so much stuff like these Facebook Lives, Secrets to Recovery. There's going to be a major project announced in the next couple of weeks, which will also be an enormous online resource. I'm giving clues. To support people as well. So it's doing the best you can with the resources you have and with the resources that we make available. In terms of going back though to the core of this question, in terms of dealing with these different kind of systems and processes, I've got a few tips. Firstly, your boundaries and working on helper patterns becomes crucial when we're coming back into the real world. So one of the things that we find is at stage 2, we are working on the 3 stages of recovery. We're working very much on getting into a healing state and managing our patterns, often in a certain amount of isolation from the real world. And part of what happens at stage 3 is we come more back into the world. Those patterns get a lot more provocation at that point. There's much more, it's a little bit like being an alcoholic who isn't surrounded by anyone drinking alcohol, that then goes out to the pub and is not able to drink. It's not a perfect analogy, but the kind of point is that there isn't the same temptation until we come back into the world and suddenly people are asking things of us and they're putting pressures on us. And when we've got a bit more energy, it's like we could say yes, and we're not going to get a major flare-up of symptoms as a result of that. But at the same time, we are still limited in our resources. And also, maybe we just don't want to say yes to doing something. Like, it isn't ultimately what's going to be good and nourishing and supportive for us. So the work that we've hopefully done earlier in the recovery path around boundaries and helper patterns and that kind of thing becomes all the more important at that stage. bouncing the boundaries becomes all the more important, like knowing your edges. And where I sometimes see people have crashes is where they've been listening to their body, working with that, going carefully, going gradually, and they've been incrementally building up. And then suddenly there's an outside pressure and they stop doing what was working. And then they kind of maybe sustain a month or a few months, and then the kind of crash comes later. So, but keep using what's working for as long as you need to be using it. Doesn't mean you have to spend your whole life in a protected way. Full recovery means full recovery, but you need to take care of yourself for as long as you take care of yourself. I also think in terms of how you communicate with other people, know your rights. That often people will be pressured into things because it's more convenient to the company or HR or whatever. But you may, I'm not an expert on this, but you may have more rights than you realize. So knowing your rights, I think, is empowering and I think is important. More times than one would want it to be the case, people have to legally defend their position, and that can be a double-edged sword. Obviously, it's good to stand up for what someone's rights are, and it can sometimes ease things financially if someone wins what they need. But it can be a battle sometimes to do that, and that can have its own consequence. Do the best you can also to educate people. Remind people of the fact that ME, chronic fatigue fibromyalgia, there is zero ambiguity and zero doubt about the validity and the existence of these illnesses in traditional medicine and science. If you're having anyone in a company or a HR department which is questioning the validity of your experience, there is no ambiguity. There is medicine, once you've got a clear diagnosis. Yes, there's all kinds of confusion around diagnostic criteria and different opinions around treatment outcomes and processes and everything else. But the existence of these conditions is no longer a debate. So make sure also that you remember you have the weight of that on your side. And sometimes you have to educate people and point them towards, World Health Organization guidelines and NICE guidelines and those sorts of things. This is the big topic, and there's a lot more that one could say on it, but hopefully, Naomi, that's helpful as a few suggestions. So then Grace asked, can Alex help give insight into the anxiety, depression, loss of confidence aspects, which can accompany reintegration at stage 3? This is becoming a video on stage 3. The body physically more able, however, the mind feels all over the place. Well, I think firstly, just to normalize this, that can be quite a common experience. Bear in mind that the breakthrough at one stage can become the limitation at the next stage. What I mean by that is that we can be using a whole set of tools and techniques that have really helped us break through. They've helped us move forwards. And they may have been things that have helped the body to recover and progress. But there might be, they either may be the things that are now the limitation, or it may be there's a different set of strategies and different set of things that need to come in and be used at that point. And so there's a kind of, what can sometimes happen is that initially we need to really work on calming the nervous system, and that's been a lot of our focus. It's been a lot of calming and settling and soothing, and that's supporting physical progress. But it might be that for the next stage, there are some different strategies that we might need. And it might be that we've almost become, this is one of the things we look at in the Conscious Transformation Program. It might be that we've almost become so connected and sensitive to our body's needs that actually we now need to kind of bring more of our personal power, more of our discipline, and more of our kind of yang energy, in a sense, forwards into the world. It can also be the case, sorry, I'm just confusing myself on the questions in front of me. It can also be the case that at this point, as we come into stage 3, one of the known challenges is that some of the bigger life questions and challenges and issues that we're dealing with are somewhat put to the side whilst we're in levels 1 and 2, because it's like that's not the priority. The priority is improving our health and our energy. Then that improves, and now we have to deal with more of the stuff in our life. And that can be its own set of challenges, right? that it's like we need to, perhaps there's relationship stuff that we haven't been dealing with and we now need to deal with. Or there's questions around purpose, questions around life direction that now needs to be looked at. So these kind of other pieces that come up that can almost be more exposed at level 3 need their own attention and their own support to work with them. Working with them successfully can be an important ingredient to preventing relapse. So one of the reasons why people can recover this, actually, let me bring in the next question because it kind of covers to it, that Gina was asking, can Alex explain how one can recover from ME after 3 years, only for it to return years later due to work stress? This time I am older and have struggled with ME for 7 years. Does the menopause affect recovery? So this is kind of leading on to this previous question. We need to deal with the underlying patterns. And if you have an underlying achiever pattern or an underlying helper pattern or an underlying anxiety pattern or some of the physical subtypes, like, you're a detox subtype or whatever, if you don't deal with those things, you can get to recovery and you've taken some loads off your boat, to use the boatload analogy. But if you start stacking on a load more loads on your boat, and you're more likely to do that if you've got these achiever, helper, anxiety type patterns, then you can recreate the same circumstance that caused you to get sick in the first place. Or you may get new loads to your boat. So being through ME, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and recovering doesn't mean that you are now immune to either recreating the same circumstance or not having taken enough loads off the boat or putting a lot of new loads on the boat. And then, yes, people can recreate the experience. And, I've seen a lot of things over the years. And I've certainly seen people where they've been fully recovered and they've then had a mini relapse or a significant relapse. There are always reasons, and we can nearly always unpick those reasons. And often, but not always, it's because these underlying patterns haven't been dealt with. Someone's recovered, gone off into an enormous, massive achiever pattern, for example, and caused the system to crash. Or someone's had some underlying factors, like there's been, Lyme disease in the system that's not been fully dealt with, or there's been, digestive things that haven't been fully dealt with. And then as someone's resilience is not what it could be, and then life starts to mount up, and then eventually a crash can get triggered. So it's obviously incredibly frustrating for someone that happens. It's important to get help, to get support. Yes, menopause can have an impact, but I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people go through menopause and actually it's been a catalyst of some positive life changes that have supported health and well-being. And yes, it can also be a load on the system. So it's all part of the jigsaw that I think one needs to consider and one needs to understand. I'm mindful people might feel like I'm giving quite short answers because there's a lot of questions here and it only really gives me kind of 3 to 5 minutes a question. But I hope that's been helpful in terms of clues. If anything, really what I'm trying to do here is at least give some signposts and some pointers towards some things that may be useful. As always, when I'm doing these live videos in this format, it's not very easy to see the questions in real time. So I'm not sure if I can figure out quickly how to get to the actual live stream of the video and see if there's any questions that are coming on. But it may be because I've thrown people at the time I'm broadcasting that no one's spotted anyway. So I can just see, let me have a quick look. I can see, Gudney says, do you have any advice for good sleep? I'm on a reduction program of sleeping pills and the lack of sleep is affecting my health very negatively. Let's add that to the list of questions that we're working with. I'm happy to do some questions around sleep, but let's save that for a separate video. So maybe Jenny, who builds the list, if you could add that to the list, Jenny, that would be great, because it's too big to give a short answer to. I hope that's been useful. And I look forward to talking to you guys next week. And then OHC Live 100, we're going to have this big announcement, which I am looking forward to. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye-bye.